Hello, this is my first story on the site. The title is a working title. Fair warning, I'm horrible at naming things. If you have names for things you would like to gift, I would appreciate it. And I appreciate feedback. On to the story. The rest of the crew had died. Mira was in a spacesuit clinging to the side of the spaceship, trying to make necessary repairs to the life support systems. While they rested, the ship had passed through a small asteroid field. Mira had always been a light sleeper, so had heard the small pings hitting the side of the ship first. She had been awake and on her way to the flight deck when the alarms went off, signifying a drop in life support abilities. Just like on a plane, you get yourself situated before helping others to get safe. By the time she had finished getting her suit on, air readouts were so low that it was impossible for anyone else to have made it into their suits. She had tried to get to Roger, the captain and also closest crew member to the suits, into his, but he was already dead. With everything offline, even CPR was impossible. Mira was a glorified mechanic on this ship. Granted, she could fix anything and was an expert in mechanical engineering among other fields of study. Here, she was Mrs. Fix-It. She had no choice and ended up jettisoning the rest of the crew. She would have liked to return their bodies to their families, but there was no means of refrigeration on board. Assuming she could get the ship working again, they would just begin to stink while they decomposed. And if she couldn't get the ship working again, she didn't want to slowly die to the smell of rot. Most of the life support machinery was in the craft. She had already repaired all of those, and her heart sank knowing she only had one tank of oxygen left and a spacewalk to repair the one bit of machinery on the outside of the craft. Finally, with 1 hour of air left, the last wires and electronics were replaced. She checked the readout on her arm. Good. Life support systems were coming back online. She would have never been able to do all of this if her crew had survived and were also using up the oxygen tanks. She crawled back to the ship and once safe, checked the readouts to ensure proper air quality. Everything was good, so she happily removed her helmet and took a grateful lungful of air. She hooked an empty air tank to the refill station and headed to the flight deck so she could do a systems check. Hopefully she would still be able to direct the ship or even communicate with Earth. While she could drive this ship, it was not something she was very good at, and she certainly wouldn't be able to land it anywhere. Mira checked the thrusters next. Her left thruster wasn't working. She brought up the exterior camera and was able to see that the thruster looked like it had taken a direct hit from an asteroid. She wouldn't know how bad it was until she got out and looked. In the meantime, she went to storage for spare parts. After loading up a bag, she went back to the air tanks and switched out the now full tank for an empty one. Mira decided she wanted full air tanks before anything else. She set the repair bag down next to her spacesuit and attached a full air tank to the suit. She really didn't want to report back to Earth just yet. They would ask her if she had done all the necessary repairs to the ship and then likely chew her out for jettisoning the corpses of her crew. She really didn't get why they would expect her to store them. She was a good 3 light years from Earth. Messages took days to receive. While propulsion was much quicker than ever imagined, communication had not kept up. Over the last 20 years, the propulsion secrets of spacecraft that had crash-landed on Earth nearly a century ago were unlocked. The first voyage using this new technology was to explore the solar system more extensively than satellites had previously. This was the second voyage, which was to visit our closest neighboring star system, Alpha Centauri. It was supposed to take a week to get there, 2 weeks to explore and take readings, but not to land, and then a week to get back. Once all of the oxygen tanks were full, Mira went out with her tools and spare parts bag to begin working on the broken thruster. She was about halfway finished when she caught movement from the corner of her eye. What is that? She focused her eyes and realized it was another ship. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. She chanted as she pressed the button at her belt to retract the guide rope to pull her rapidly back to the ship. Real freaking aliens. What do I do? She panicked as she began removing the spacesuit and then headed to the flight deck. A strange loud noise hummed through the machinery. Mira had never heard that noise before. She used the exterior cameras to see what was going on and saw that the other ship was right over her own. An opening appeared and then a light struck the ship. There had been some movement of Mira's spacecraft, but she felt it all stop when the light hit. Is that a goddamn tractor beam? Her much smaller craft was brought into the larger, and she soon felt a small jarring as her vessel was set down. There was a new sound that reminded Mira of sonar, as the noise seemed to start from one end of the ship and travel, getting louder and louder as it came to her and the nose of the ship. Once it had gone the whole length of the ship, it stopped. Mira used the cameras to see if she could see what was going on. A panel of wall opened, and a group of beings walked in. They appeared to be speaking to each other, but these cameras didn't provide sound. The aliens were lizard-like in appearance and coloring, except they all had short hair. Were they lizards or mammals? Their hands reminded her of bat feet. They appeared to be dexterous like her own, but there didn't appear to be any nails or claws. They were a dark green, and each alien had a slightly different shade of the dark green. The heads didn't have a pronounced snout like many Earth reptiles, but more like a turtle's face. She didn't see any teeth, or at least none that she recognized as teeth, so at least that was good, right? They were bipedal and had tails. They also all appeared to have uniforms on. Mira was panicking. Part of her mind was cataloging every nuance of these aliens, while the rest mentally repeated, "Oh shit," while it ran in circles. It was quite an odd feeling, really. The one in the center had more embellishments on his uniform, and it waved its hand in what was unmistakably a hello gesture. It fucking waved hello. She gasped. And then it appeared to wait. There were no external speakers on this craft, and due to no microphones on the cameras, she didn't even know what they sounded like. She could do a scan, she supposed. But it wasn't meant for something so close. It was meant to scan nearby planets. However, she could at least find out what kind of atmosphere surrounded her ship. She would know if it was breathable, if the pressure was survivable. So she ran the scan. She watched the aliens to see if they would react. The sound of the scan was too high for humans to pick up. It was, however, in a dog's range, so if they reacted or didn't react, it would still tell her something about them. One of them put a hand to the side of its head and appeared to say something. The other two seemed to reply, but made no visible yes or no symbol. So they can hear it, but it doesn't cause discomfort. She mumbled as she looked over the readout. Air concentrations were similar to Earth, but the atmospheric pressure was lower. This would be like being up on a high mountain. It would be difficult to breathe, especially if she went from in the ship to out there without warning. The aliens were moving again. They found the door and it was opened. She had forgotten to lock it from the inside after coming back on board. Mira cursed herself. She switched to the interior cameras, which did give sound and could be broadcast over. They were speaking to each other as they looked around, poking at the discarded space suit and the oxygen tanks. One pointed to the American flag insignia as well as the NASA one, and the other two replied, but again made no other body movement or gesture. They continued down the hall, and the same one that pointed out the exterior camera pointed out the interior one. Their language sounded like hisses and clicks. The same one looked directly at the camera and waved. This time Mira heard the language that went with it. She pressed the intercom button. She knew they probably wouldn't understand her either, but at least she could try. There was a click when the microphone went live. "I can't understand you." The aliens startled briefly with a widening of their eyes. They chattered briefly to each other. Then one of them left quickly, and in the other exterior cameras, she saw it went to a panel at the wall and appeared to speak at something. Inside, the two there looked around curiously, but otherwise waited. Outside, a few minutes passed before a door opened, and a fourth alien handed over a device to that alien. It then quickly rejoined the other two. It handed the device over to the leader. "What is that?" She didn't know if they understood her, or if it was guessing based on it being a likely question. It moved close to the camera and then turned its head to what appeared to be an ear. It pulled the fur away from an area behind the ear, and Mira could see what looked like old scar tissue. It moved back, and the other two did the same to show identical scars. It then mimed using the device on one of the other aliens. It then pointed to that alien's mouth, and then its own ear, and then reversed, pointing to its own mouth to the alien's ear. "Translator," Mira supplied. There was no reaction. They waited a little bit, but when Mira didn't appear, they continued forward, looking in each room as they passed it. Mira was still scared. She grabbed a hammer from her tool bag as well as a screwdriver. It was a poor selection of weapons, but they were as familiar to her as anything else would be. The door opened and she was now staring at 3 aliens, who each stood at around 6.5 feet tall. Mira was only 5'2" and tiny in proportions, but still she stood in a fighting stance. All 3 of the aliens flicked out their tongues in the way snakes do to taste the air. She hadn't noticed it on the cameras, but the rational cataloging part of her mind noted that they each had a bubble around them. It didn't seem to get in their ways. She then remembered their atmosphere was different from hers, and it likely allowed them to be here in her higher pressured spaceship. As they tasted the air, the aliens tasted her fear. Their eyes widened at that knowledge. After a few clicks and hisses from the leader, the other 2 retreated from the room. The leader then pointed to her makeshift weapons and pointed to the floor. Its voice got lower and more gentle sounding as it continued to click and hiss at her. As Mira tried to decide on whether or not to disarm herself, the controls started to beep, indicating an incoming message. Shit. She swore. She pointed at the leader with a hammer. You, go over there. She pointed to an area out of camera range. Mira then turned to the controls, set her hammer and screwdriver in the tool bag, and pressed a button that closed the door to the flight deck. There was startled hissing from the leader, but she pointed over to the area she wanted it to go. When it moved, she took a look around, took a deep breath and answered the call. The command center back home would be able to tell how long it took to answer, so she didn't want to cause any alarms back home. She honestly wasn't sure how the government would handle knowledge of aliens and first contact just yet, so she would start with pretending everything was as it had been prior to alien abduction. Author's name and the link to original text in the description. Consider tapping the thumbs up and pressing the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. And please join our channel.